Welcome to our Navigating the Waters of CMMC webinar. We are excited that you're here. We've got some really good information to share with you today. It's going to move a little bit fast. We've got about an hour together. I do want to leave some time for questions at the end. If you have questions as they pop in as we go through the material, just throw those in the chat. If we don't have the opportunity to answer all those questions, we will circle back after this and get in contact with you and make sure your questions get answered. So again, thanks for your time. Let's get started. Shivani, can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, folks, let me give you just a little bit of background on me and kind of how I ended up here at Abacode. With Abacode, I am a virtual chief information security officer. That's a fancy way to say I provide advisory and consulting services to our clients. I help them build strong security programs. My background is primarily from the government. I was in the Air Force for 22 years, retired as a lieutenant colonel 3 years ago. When I left the military, I went to work for PwC. And then jumped over to here at Abacode about 1.5 years ago, where I've been in my current role. A couple things about me, I do come from a DoD background, so I've got a lot of familiarity with NIST. I managed IT enterprises for the government, for the DoD, and for some national agencies, up to and including CIO and CISO roles twice. Regionally and globally. Had the honor of leading an IT services organization with security responsibilities of about 150 folks in the Middle East, servicing about 6,000 joint warfighters in 2015, 2016. So really good experience there. I started my IT career on the help desk. I think that's the perfect place to start your IT career. I learned a ton there, and then just kind of progressed up from there. I'm also an identical twin, so I don't know if there's any twins on the call, but if you want to throw something in the chat, that'd be kind of cool. I'm twin B, meaning I was the second one. And, as I'm getting older, I'm kind of getting into yoga. So I really like yoga. Haven't done a whole lot of it. Been doing it for about 1 year. And, I'm really getting some benefit from it. So if you're getting up there like me, you may want to check out yoga. I've really found it to be beneficial. So that's just a little bit about me, about who I am and kind of how I ended up here. But the real stars of the show, next slide, please, are our solution advisory team. So here at Abacode, we've put together a really experienced solution advisory team to do consulting in this area, specifically around CMMC. We've got Barb, and we won't go into introductions for these folks. Just know that they're on the call. They're here to support. Barb's been doing compliance solutioning for 10 to 15 years. Very deep experience in the space. Denise as well is very, very seasoned and experienced. She brings up 20, 25 years of compliance and security consulting with her as well. And Chris and James both have worked at auditing firms, managed security firms, have got a ton of experience with compliance programs. So that's our solution advisory team. Those are the folks backing me up and making sure that we can help you along your journey to develop the solutions that you need with regards to CMMC. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So as we get started here, folks, one thing that I want to kind of set the table with and really start to dive in on is the CMMC model, and the fact that CMMC actually doesn't start with CMMC. And I'll kind of go into detail about what I mean by that. But I'm going to kind of guide today's discussion around 3 key points. The first key point is your CUI strategy. That's your control and classified information strategy. That is going to be critical to your success with CMMC. Absolutely critical. That is going to be a business decision on how you will store, process, and transmit controlled unclassified information. That is the federally protected information that you will be responsible for, making sure is secure, right? So that's going to be critically important. CUI strategy is item number 1, priority number 1 for you on your pathway to CMMC. Number 2 is I really want you to understand the importance of NIST 800-171. You really need to understand what that is and how CMMC is related to that and built upon that. I'll show you that in detail, but I really need you to understand that NIST 800-171 is a key part of this. If CMMC is your destination, your NIST 800-171 is the vehicle that's going to take you there. And then thirdly, I do want to talk about CMMC and understand the steps involved and think about your whole supply chain in terms of your responsibilities as a critical vendor to protecting controlled unclassified information. Let's go to the next slide, please. So we have to start with the background, and we'll be quick. We did put our unofficial CMMC mascot on the slide here. I want to go through the background more for framing and alignment than anything else. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page with regards to what CMMC is, and you know what it means to the defense industrial base and specifically to the suppliers and the vendors. Next slide, please. If you like the mascot, maybe give us some love in the chat, and that way we'll know that we're on the right track there. Okay, so let's kind of dive into now some of the meat of the background. So CMMC, I think everybody understands, is the Department of Defense's new cybersecurity maturity model certification. The last C is critically important. It is a certification process. It is not a new standard. It is not a new regulation around protecting, controlling classified information. It simply adds a certification process to the existing processes that are already in place with regards to the federal laws around protecting controlled unclassified information. So I will go into a lot more detail on that as we move along. You know, the bottom line is the Defense Department, and having been, you know, a uniform member for over 2 decades of my life and, you know, serving the country, you know, near and far, I can tell you that the threat is very, very real. I can tell you that we are losing national secrets through our supply chain, and CMMC is designed to help address that threat. And the bottom line is, you know, this is a national security issue, and you are part of the solution. So it's critically important that you understand what your role is and what you can do to help secure the DoD supply chain and continue to do business with the government. Because from the defense industrial base standpoint, you know, the U.S. military cannot maintain its standing as, you know, the best and most capable force in the world without the defense industrial base, right? So that's a symbiotic relationship, and everybody needs to kind of understand how to play well and how to achieve the ultimate goal, which is getting our warfighters what they need and keeping our national security, you know, a top priority. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the CMMC model framework. What you're going to see in these slides today is you're going to see several slides that are have been approved from public release by the DoD. These are the CMMC slides. I'm a big believer in going to the source for information. So what I don't want to do is give you my interpretation of what I think or, you know, what I believe is the right answer. I want to go straight to the source, and I want to explain things from the model framework, and I want to make sure that we're aligned to that single source of truth with regards to the information that we're talking about. So the CMMC model framework, again, sits on top of the federal laws that are already in place that govern how to protect, control, unclassified information. And that's all we're talking about here. We're talking about controlled unclassified information. That is the main thing. CMMC is broken up into domains. You might think of those as control families if you're familiar with NIST and how NIST does its security control families. Domains, control families, same thing. The domains are made up of processes. Processes is where the DoD CMMC lays in the maturity requirement. And you can think of processes really as the high-level governance. These are the policies, the documented procedures, and the plans that enable you to be successful with regards to the security control requirements found in the domains. Each domain has a set of capabilities that are defined capabilities. You might think of those as outcomes, business outcomes that your security program is delivering. And then the practices are those things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis to implement the controls, to deliver those capabilities so that you've got effective management so that you can meet the requirements of the domain. So if you think about working that, you know, from bottom to top, the practices is where the implementation happens on the day-to-day. You're going to deliver those capabilities. Those are going to be supported by the proper governance and management, and then that's going to allow you to be successful in that respective domain. You do that across the domains. You've secured your portion of the DoD supply chain, and you'll get your CMMC. It's really that simple. One key point to mention here is maturity is going to be one of the things that gets looked at, and this is what we see, you know, as we work with our clients. The documentation piece of this is the maturity, right? You have to have robust documentation, and what we see a lot of times is that folks are doing things in practice, but the documentation really isn't there in the way that would be acceptable to a federal standard. And that's the way you need to think about control and classified information. It's federally protected data. that's being shared with you. Next slide. Okay, so this just kind of shows you the CMMC model structure. Again, there's the 17 capability domains. There's nothing new in here as far as information security, as far as cybersecurity. This is all derived from NIST 853. This is all fairly standard when it comes to an information security program and a compliance program. What's new is this certification requirement. What's new is the fact that we've now laid in maturity of the processes and the practices, and we've created, the DoD has created a formal certification process by which to certify its vendors and their cybersecurity programs, capabilities, processes, and practices. Next slide, please. One of the big questions we get is, well, what level? I know there's different levels. What level am I going to be certified to? How do I know what level I'm going to be certified to? Where do my requirements come from? All of those requirements are derived from your contracts and the amount of CUI that you handle and your role in the supply chain with regards to the CUI that you're responsible for. So at level 1, you're not actually storing, processing, or transmitting any CUI. That's all federally contracted information. No CUI. Level 2 is where you start to bridge the gap, where you start to build out your CUI control environment. And level 3 is really where they laid in the requirements around NIST 800-171 and starting to align and stack those requirements into the certification process. So level 3, I think, is where most folks will probably want to target so that you've got the ability to store, process, and transmit control unclassified information. If you don't have a need to do that, then you don't need to do that. You can stay at a lower level. But I think the majority of folks that I've spoken with are targeting level 3 strictly from a business development standpoint. Next slide, please. So that was the processes. This is the practice. Same levels, right? So you're going to get certified to a level. That level is going to have a defined amount of controls or practices that are required that comply with all of the federal regulations around the protected data. So again, if we use level 3 kind of as the target, level 3 is inclusive of all of the NIST 800-171 controls, plus an additional 20 controls that were specifically selected by the Department of Defense to add rigor and additional security measures based on specific threats to that level 3. So that will be a robust program that you will have if you're level 3 certified. I will tell you, having been in the security industry for almost 25 years, the NIST requirements are not difficult requirements, but they are thorough and they do require implementation, and they do require evidence, and they do require solid governance. So again, those are the areas I think you'll find yourself focusing the most on as you work through your CMMC journey. Next slide, please. Okay, so the other big question that we get a lot is, well, when does this go into effect? When does CMMC go into effect? When do I need to be CMMC compliant? I've got some slides in here, and we'll go into the detail on this, but CMMC is going to be phased in over the next 5 years for all defense contracts. So they're going to go from 0 to 100 in terms of amount of contracts that have a CMMC requirement in there, and they're going to start very, very slowly, and it's going to be a build effort. Now, however, saying that, you still, if you're storing, processing, or transmitting control and classified information today, you still have a requirement to be NIST 800-171 compliant, and we'll talk a lot about that as well. So CMMC is going to start, it goes into effect this fiscal year, and the fiscal year for the government has already started. There will be a limited number of contracts selected by the services and the components to determine which ones will pilot the CMMC process. And then that will continue to evolve and continue to build until we're, again, at 100% of contracts with the CUI requirement, with the CMMC requirement built in I believe it's FY26, so or 25 or 26. So it does go out over the next several fiscal years. The ecosystem is just now coming to life. Assessors are just now being trained, and the assessment organizations, that whole part of the ecosystem is just now coming to life. So it is going to take some time. Next slide. This gives you an idea of the projected rollout, CMMC rollout. And again, this is a slide from the Defense Department, approved for public release. You can see in the top box there, this current fiscal year, FY21, is going to be 15 total contracts that are going to contain the CMMC requirement. So in FY21, there's going to actually be 15 piloted contracts that will have the CMMC requirement in there. Which 15 contracts, the Defense Department will determine that. That will be determined by the acquisition executives in terms of which ones they'll pilot the CMMC requirement into. FY22, it jumps up to 75, then it jumps up again, and it jumps. And so you can see the evolutionary build there over the next 5 fiscal years with regards to the CMMC requirement. And again, all new DoD contracts will have the requirement starting in FY26. Next slide. So now I want to kind of, the background's in place. I want to start to really dive into, as we talk about navigating the waters, I think there are 3 key waypoints along the journey. And this is absolutely the most critical one, is your CUI strategy as a business. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so the message here, folks, is really control what you can control. And what I mean by that is, your business, and this is not an IT thing and it's not a security thing, it's a business decision. You've got to come up with a way that you can define your control on classified information. That's going to be driven by your contract requirements. It should not be mysterious where my CUI is and where does it come from. The contract vehicle is your authorization as a supplier and a vendor to handle this federally protected information. The government cannot share that with you unless you have an authorization to receive it, and that authorization is via the contract, okay? And then once you have it, there are things that you're responsible for managing, and that's anywhere that CUI is stored, processed, or transmitted. Okay, stored meaning where do you keep it, processed meaning what application or who's using it, manipulating the data, and then transmitted is who's sending it to who, where is it going. You need to know that. And you can scope this down, and scoping is a very, very important concept. It's going to save you potentially a ton of time and a ton of money if you scope this correctly. What you don't want to do, if you can avoid it, is lump your CUI in with all of your other enterprise data and then wrap all of these federal protections around it, because that's going to be that could be a little pricey for you if that's not required by the business. Next slide. So when we talk about narrowing the scope, I mean, I would just go through the 5 W's, right? And I would again have a business team conversation around this and really drill into, okay, who needs access to the CUI? And that should be a defined number of people, and it should be driven by business requirements. And if somebody doesn't need access to it, then I would say don't give them access to it. The folks that do need access, what do they need to do with the data? Do they just need to read the data? Do they need to work on the data? Do they need to create CUI? Do they need to send it to someone? What do the marking requirements need to be? There's formal marking requirements and how you mark and handle this data. Where does the data need to go, and who else needs to see it? When does it come in? When does it go out, right? Why is it even needed? That's another question, a scoping question that you can really start to ask and understand. And then overall, how will it be managed? So if we do, in fact, have a requirement to have control and classified information, we've identified who needs access to it. We've minimized that list. We've identified what they need to do with it, and we've minimized the touching of the data. We've identified specifically where it's going to be stored, segmented away from everything else. It needs to be in its own, file drawer. And then we've identified how it comes in and how it goes out. That's going to allow you to build a very effective security program around your CUI, and it's going to greatly improve the efficiency of your CMMC journey. Next slide. This is a scoping example, and I just think this is important. Pictures are kind of important when we talk about this, because it's a lot of conceptual ideas. But again, if we start at the top left of this diagram, the CUI is going to flow to you via a contract authorization. you are going to have that segmented off with a very clear authorization. Had a computer issue there, sorry about that. So you're going to have defined set of users. You may have some specific security tooling just for your CUI data if you don't need it elsewhere in your enterprise. And then you're going to have a relationship between your CUI data environment and your enterprise, your other data enterprise. And you need to define what that relationship is via the ports, protocols, and services, what controls that you're going to be inheriting from the enterprise with regards to your enterprise security tools. Incident response is a good example, right? Your incident response plan, you might have a security incident in the enterprise that doesn't involve CUI, and you might have a security incident in your enterprise that does involve CUI. So you don't need a separate process to manage that for your CUI data. You just need to be able to identify, does this incident involve CUI? And if it does, what are the extra steps and the extra controls that are put in place to manage that risk to the controlled and classified information? So hopefully that makes sense to you. You're also going to have external systems and interconnects. And again, what you want to do is really minimize the amount of interaction and touching and transmitting and processing of the CUI data to the absolute minimum that's required by the business. The reason for that is that anywhere that you store, process, or transmit CUI is going to be in scope, meaning that you're going to have your NIST 800-171 program extend to those areas. You're going to be certified against those areas. So just need to be really careful about how you approach that. This is a key point that you really need to understand well. You want to inherit whatever you can from the enterprise. You don't want to have redundant systems. But again, you also don't want to have your CUI mixed together with all of your enterprise data. We talked about the CUI requirement will be defined by the contract. That will flow to you from the government. And you're also going to need to develop, a high-level diagram that shows this kind of picture here that we see, and then a data flow diagram behind that shows, okay, these are all of the places the CUI goes. These are the applications that are in scope. These are the systems that are in scope, and so on and so forth. Hopefully that's clear to you, because again, this is a critical strategy thing that you're going to need to define and determine well before you start calling auditing firms to come in and look at your CMMC program. You can really help yourself here by controlling what you can control and getting really clear around your CUI and how you're going to manage that. Next slide, please. Okay, I want to go to point 2 now and talk a little bit about the NIST 800-171 program and how that relates to CMMC. This is another critical point that is really important to understand if you're going to be successful with CMMC. Next slide. So with regards to NIST 800-171, NIST 800-171 was a result of an executive order that basically defined the government's approach to the protection of control and classified information. NIST 800-171 is essentially the regulation that is created for non-federal organizations on what their requirements are to store, process, and transmit control and classified information. The government uses its acquisition regulations, whether that's the federal acquisition regulation or the defense federal acquisition regulation. That's its mechanism to communicate with you, the vendors, to apply those requirements directly to you in the bounds of those contracts. NIST 800-171 has been a self-attestation. It went into effect at the end of 2017, early 2018. So as vendors have been bidding on contracts where there is a CUI requirement, they've been self-attesting that they've got a NIST 800-171 program in place and all is well. CMMC takes that a step further and says, self-attestation is okay, but it's not good enough anymore. We're going to put in a formal assessment process and certification process. And so that's what CMMC does. CMMC is built on NIST 800-171. Next slide. What's going to be critically important as you build this out is the documentation is going to be really, really key. So you're going to have very clear policies standards, controls, and procedures around your CUI environment, around the implementation of your NIST 800-171 controls. The reason that this is so important is this now ties directly into the CMMC processes and the way that maturity is going to be assessed. So this is a whole different ballgame than self-attesting and saying, yes, we're implementing all these controls. This is, trust but verify. Now show me your policies, show me your controls, show me your procedures. And oh, by the way, this is the right way to do it. It takes a little bit of time, but if you can create a clear policy, define clear procedures, you will find that your security program will run much better than just, taking this kind of ad hoc approach to it and having these, best practices that maybe people understand, but it's not real clear. This is absolutely the right way to do it. It will add a little bit of rigor to your program. And so you really need to get the documentation piece of this right. It's foundational to your CMMC success. Next slide, please. We go back to that scoping example for just a second. And as we talk about now building out all of your security documentation, and maybe you have it in place for your NIST 800-171 program. And if you do, kudos to you. You're on your way to a pretty smooth CMMC journey. If you don't, and you're a vendor that or a supplier that uses CUI, that you've got an existing CUI requirement, and you're not sure if you've got a NIST 800-171 program, or maybe you're not sure what kind of state that program's in regards to the documentation and the implementation, you're going to have some work to do. So that is, no kidding, the first place I would start is, what does my NIST 800-171 program look like today? That's something you can do today and start moving towards, CMMC. We talked about defining the roles and responsibilities. We talked about limiting the scope, very, very important. And your documentation really needs to tell a story. It needs to tell a very clear story of the government shares this federally protected information with you. What do you do with it? Who's allowed to access it? The 5 W's behind that. It's stored here, processed here, transmitted here. That story's got to come together. It's got to come together for you. It's got to come together for your business. Otherwise, you're not going to get buy-in and advocacy. And then lastly, it's got to come together for the auditors. Otherwise, you're going to have a real bumpy ride, to CMMC. Next slide. So as we roll out CMMC, or as the DoD rolls out CMMC, one of the things that was addressed as an immediate concern and an immediate fix was the self-attestation. So what the DoD has done is they've beefed up the self-attestation by passing an interim rule in the Defense Acquisition Regulation. There's a new clause in there now, effective November 30th. Any vendor that's bidding on a DoD contract has to complete a basic self-assessment of their NIST 800-171 program in addition to the self-attestation. Self-attestation and self-assessment as an interim step to CMMC. So this is being put in place to bridge the gap between where we are today and full CMMC rollout. This is actually going to start to identify where the big gaps are with regards to NIST 800-171 programs. When you submit your self-assessment, that's going to get entered into the DoD Supplier Performance Risk System. So you're going to get a score. You're going to get a score attached to your. You're going to get a score attached to your self-assessment in terms of your security posture with regards to NIST 800-171. The goal here is to not duplicate, right? So again, the interim rule will feed right into ultimate CMMC certification in the program. Next slide. This gives you a look, and this is from the DoD. This is approved for public release. This is not my interpretation. This shows you exactly how many assessments are going to get done. What you see here in the slide is the blue bars and the white bars, or silver bars. Those are the CMMC assessments that are going to occur. Those are the CMMC certifications that are going to occur. The yellow bars, or gold bars, those are the 800-171 assessments. So what you can see very clearly from this slide is CMMC is literally built on top of NIST 800-171. This coming fiscal year that we're in right now, the majority of the assessment work is going to be focused on getting the basic assessments done for the vendors with regards to their NIST 800-171 program. It's going to be a very small slice at the top that are going to have CMMC requirements, but the majority are going to be impacted by the NIST 800-171 program. As we move into the out years, you'll see more CMMC requirements. And it's not that the NIST 800-171 requirements go away. You can see it's a pretty straight line. It's just that they're going to add additional CMMC requirements on top of the NIST 800-171 requirements. Next slide. One key point about the DoD assessment methodology, so they've published what their assessment methodology is. You're essentially going to rate yourself against the controls that are found in NIST 800-171. You're going to start with a score of 110, and then you're going to subtract points for controls that aren't implemented. That's going to arrive at, you're going to arrive at a total score, and then that's the score that gets entered into the DoD supplier risk system. You're also going to have to provide a date by when you expect to achieve the 110 score. So this is a plan of actions and milestones. You're going to have to put an action plan together that says, hey, we did a self-assessment. We started with 110 points. We lost all these points. We're at a 64 of 110. We're going to close that gap by doing this, 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 and this. And then here's the timeline associated with that. So by April of 2021, we should be back to 110 points with regards to our NIST 800-171 program. And then again, CMMC follows that. It doesn't come before that. It's not separate from that. It gets built on top of that. It's the certification process. Next slide. So as you go through this journey, this CMMC journey, there are some potential long poles that you may run against, that you're going to have to spend some time. You're going to have to get some alignment against. Number one is documentation. We've already hit on that, so I didn't put that on the slide. Number two is business alignment. This is a business effort. This is going to be a team effort. This is probably going to be a paradigm shift. And you just need to make sure that your leadership is aware of that you've got advocacy, and that the business is going to be able to respond to, and I won't even say it's a new rule, right? Maybe it's a newly enforced rule. You're going to have to have business acumen there, across the business, especially all your folks that are handling CUI. That also includes your vendors as well. So if you're a prime or you've got subs, those folks are going to have to be aligned as well to what the CUI management program is, and they're going to be a key part of your control implementation. Number two is risk assessment. If you're not used to doing risk assessments, this could be potentially an issue that's going to just take a little bit of time to work through, or you may want to rely on some external help here. Risk assessments are very, very important, critically important. And if you're not used to doing them, they may seem a little foreign to you. So the risk assessment will drive a lot of your implementation. You're going to need a monitoring solution, right? So SIM is a security information and event monitoring solution. These are the sensors that are out in your environment. You're going to need some sort of monitoring solution here. It's a requirement. So if you don't have that in place today, you're going to need to start thinking about that. This is probably an area where you're going to have to make an investment decision with regards to what SIM you're going to implement or how you're going to go about managing your continuous monitoring requirement. Data classification is another area that you're probably going to run up against. If you're not used to, and your business doesn't have the muscle memory to do data classification, if this is something foreign to you, again, you're going to have to put the policies and the procedures in place to make sure that the CUI is properly marked. This is another reason, this ties into the scope bullet below it. This is another reason why you don't want everyone to have access to it if they don't need access to it, because anyone that touches it has to mark it appropriately, has to store it appropriately, has to transmit it appropriately. So you can just really help yourself by limiting that scope. And again, I kind of already hit on the supply chain, but that's a key part of it too, is you need to make sure anywhere that you're flowing CUI, you're responsible for that flow down. So you need to maintain control over that CUI and show how that flow down is being effectively managed by you and by your NIST 800-171 program. That'll be fundamental to your CMMC success as well. Next slide. So now I want to talk about the notion of continuous compliance. So I would say your goal is to not get certified, right? Your goal is to stay certified. That's really your goal, because once you go through the process of building these, and I've gone through massive audits, inside the DoD, we have these cybersecurity readiness inspections. They literally, come with a team of people, and it's brutal. If you go through that once, you don't ever want to go through it again. So you make sure when you get through that the first time that everything is in place and everything is staying refreshed, so that when it does come around again, you're not building it from scratch and having to figure out how to do it. That's critically important. This is also where the CMMC maturity comes into play. A key part of the process maturity that they've built into the CMMC model is specifically around this notion of staying compliant, making sure you've got resource planning, making sure that you've got governance and documentation around it, so that you're not just going to get certified and die on the vine, that it's actually not a point in time inspection, but it's more of a process maturity of this is just how we do business on the day-to-day. Next slide. So the way that we do this here at Abacode is we've got a compliance management service. We wrap all of this into a single service so that it's very easy for our clients. You may want to do this internally. You may want to get some help with this. You may want to outsource this. Again, those are business conversations that you need to be having with your leadership, especially if you're in the security realm or the IT realm, to make sure that you're putting together something that's manageable for the business and something that's going to be resourced going forward. So you may need to add a headcount. You may need to find a partner. These are decisions that you're going to have to work through as you go through your CMMC management strategy. But again, all of this is being built upon the NIST 800-171 program. So if that's not solid and in place, you really need to get that done first before you can talk about how you're going to do your CMMC continuous management. Next slide. This just shows you a representation of, kind of how we do it and how we see this as, this is really about maturity. And if you look at the green line, kind of, as your maturity goes up, what you're going to find out is that your risk is going to go down and your costs are going to go down significantly. So once you start to build out your program, or you start to mature your program, and maturing your program really means your ability to deliver the desired outcome faster, your ability to measure that desired outcome to make sure that it's within specifications, and your ability to store, process, and transmit controlled and classified information in a way that's very effective and that drastically reduces the risk. So over time, you're going to find that your business is going to get much better at doing this. But again, that comes from the solid foundation of the documentation. It comes from the strategy of how the CUI is going to be managed and who's going to have access to it, and so forth. Next slide. This just shows you a graphical picture. You need some way to measure this. You need some way to manage this, and you need some way to report on this. So I would just encourage you to look at that, whether you're going to use an Excel sheet or you're going to buy a tool, whatever your solution might be. You're going to need to be able to show and prove here that we are compliant. These are the controls that are coming up. We need to review these things. We need to get this done. We've got a gap here. We're going to close the gap by this date. All of that needs to be very easily managed and reported on continuously. That's going to help you tremendously as you maintain that steady state readiness of continuous compliance. Next slide. Okay, so I'm just getting ready to wrap up. I know I went through a lot of that quickly. Hopefully some of that was valuable. I really do hope that some of that was valuable for you. And wherever you are in this, it's going to be okay. You're just going to have to do it. And some things that I've seen that are really helped me personally, and things that I've seen that have worked really well, are just some key takeaways here that I wanted to kind of go back over real quickly. Things that if I was in your situation, these are the things that I would be doing right now. These are the things that I advise our clients on. Number one is you've got to establish some sort of business level working group or steering group that's going to help you manage this. And if that doesn't exist, then create it, because it's absolutely important. You're going to need input from all of the different lines of business. You're going to need input from your business development folks. You're going to need input from the executive team. I would highly recommend that you create some sort of forum to manage all of this together with your business partners. In that process, identify an executive champion. All right, who cares the most about your business winning government contracts? That's your executive champion. That's what I would do, and then I would use that person as your prime advocate for everything that you're trying to get implemented and built out within the business. Create a meeting cadence and reporting rhythm. If you don't have that, then just make it a thing. Just create it and say, hey, I'm going to start showing, we're going to start having this meeting. I need these people here. Create a charter, create a RAID log. That's risk, action, issue, decision. So anything where you've identified a risk, capture that. Anywhere that there's an action, I need Bob to review the CUI policy, capture that. Issues are risks that have been materialized. So any issue that's preventing progress, capture that. Any decisions that you need from the senior leadership team, capture that. And start, having a monthly forum where those issues are raised and are being taken care of. That could be 10 minutes, it could be 2 hours. It just depends on where you are. But I think you'll find that very, very helpful. And then just, from your perspective, you're an evangelist. So just, if you're trying to implement this, you want to barrage your folks as much as you can with CUI resources. I'm working on putting a free training class around this, on how CUI can be handled and marked and, all of those things. What are those CUI resources? So if you're interested in that, just let me know. But you need to be the one that's kind of championing the CUI so that folks understand how it's scoped, why it's scoped. The bottom line there is you can't do this alone. You're going to really need to get a whole business here approach to make sure that your program is built and that you've got the advocacy within the business for it to stick. It really needs to stick because it's going to be significant. And it's again, it comes with financial impact for the business if it isn't done correctly. Number 2 point, the CMMC appendices, and I think Shivani's got a link that she'll put in the chat or send out. Those appendices that are listed on the CMMC, there's 2, Appendix A and Appendix B, very helpful. I would suggest that you read through those. I don't know where you are in your CMMC journey, but I would absolutely, that's required reading. I would internalize those and read through those. They're very, very helpful. You also need to familiarize yourself with NIST 800-171 Alpha. That is the self-assessment guidance for NIST 800-171. It tells you exactly what to look for. So as you're assessing these controls, or if you're working with a partner that's helping you assess these controls, NIST 800-171 will tell you what right looks like, and it will tell you exactly what questions to ask and what to look for. Extremely helpful document. I would definitely recommend you take a look at that. And then the next point is, with the notion of the story, right? So stories are powerful. People get stories. They're very, very powerful. You need to think of your CUI, your NIST 800-171 program, and your CMMC program as a story, right? And the way I think about it is, the government has shared some very precious resource with you, right? It's federally protected. So there's laws. So the government has now shared this resource with you. And so then just walk yourself through the story. Okay, well, access control. Okay, who has access to this precious resource that the government has shared with us? Who in our business has access to that? How do we manage the assets that are required to protect this precious resource? How do we know our folks are trained and aware of what this precious resource even is? How do we manage and monitor what's happening with this precious resource? What happens if we want to make a change to a business process that deals with this precious resource? How do we identify the folks that can actually, how do we verify that they are who they say they are when they want access to this resource? What do we do if something goes wrong with this resource? What if we lose it? What if somebody takes it? Respond to that, right? What is the maintenance associated with how we protect this precious resource? How do we verify that the folks that we're giving access to are actually trusted? Do we do background checks on these people? How do we know that they can actually have access to this? So again, walk yourself through the control families. You can tell an entire story around your CUI and where it comes in and where it goes. That's going to be very, very important for you to understand, because it's going to, again, drive your control implementation. It's going to drive your scoping. The story part of this is huge. And it's also relatable, right? You're going to be able to relate that to your business partners. and the other folks throughout the business where you're going to need advocacy. So I would highly recommend that you kind of think of it in the story terms. Control statement. So as you're building your documentation, right, you want fill in the blank simple. You want to say, you want to have a process by where you build a control statement. And this is the 5 W's. So you just want to say, who has access? What do they do with it? Where do they store it? And it needs to be the same sentence over and over. The government does not mind redundant. They do not mind standardized. They actually like it, right? So if everything reads exactly the same and it's very clear to follow, that will help you out a great deal. It will also be able to generate the evidence that you need and all the other requirements around your control statements. When you're writing your control statements, you really need to think about people, process, and technology, right? Who is doing this? How do we do this? And then what are we using to do it? That's got to be in your control statement. And again, keep those as simple and as straightforward as you can. Make sure they're detailed enough to explain what's happening, but you don't need to be overly verbose or overly technical here. Resource management plan is critically important. This is part of the processes. This is an element of the maturity. The government want to see that, through their auditing arm, right, which is the third-party assessors, they're going to be checking for things like, is this program resource? Do you have the right headcount? Have you trained people to manage this program? Is this a thing that's going to stay alive in your business so that we can continue to share this very precious federally protected information with you? If it were me, I would make that one of the first action items in the steering group agenda, is to make sure that we've got enough resources on hand to manage this program. And I would identify what those resources are. And then again, I would push that up to that executive champion and to that steering group and raise that issue and say, hey guys, we've got an issue here. We're going to need to either find a partner. We're going to need to either hire a headcount. Somebody's going to have to manage this for us on a go forward, because it's a new certification requirement that's being levied via these contract vehicles. And so that's the conversation that you need to be having from a business side. And then the last thing I'll say, picture's worth 1,000 words. Good diagrams are going to be a critical part of your good story. You're going to need the illustrations to really make the story pop. You're going to have a high level, simple diagram, something like the scoping diagram that we looked at. You're going to have a data flow diagram that shows, where the ones and zeros go, and who and how and where and what it is interfaced with, and APIs and all of that. That needs to all be shown and explained. Your security architecture is going to have to be in there. Your antivirus solution, what all these different controls are that you're implementing in a pictorial, enterprise architecture diagram, very simple to understand. That's the first thing they'll probably look at, would be your architecture, to make sure that they can understand from a picture standpoint what's going on here. And then as you look at that picture, you should be able to tell the story of the picture going through the 17 control families. And then lastly, build a good roadmap going forward in terms of, where are we today? Do the basic assessment. I would encourage you to run that now. Run through that today. You don't have to submit a score today, but you should know where you're at. And you should know, do we have a little bit of work to do? Do we have kind of a lot of work to do? Or do we have a lot of work to do? Because, if you're like some of the folks that I've talked to, what they're doing is they're getting, hey, we need to be CMMC certified, right? And that's going to land on your desk. And then you're like, well, what do I do with this now? And it's like, well, you got to build a whole program around it, right? So, and the roadmap has to be clear, and you have to show that so that you can get the advocacy and the support that you need. I think that's the last slide, Shivani, if you want to just flip it one more time. Yeah. So we've got about 10 minutes or so for questions. I don't know if we received any questions in the chat, or if there are any points that we want to hit back on, but I'll open it up to questions and discussions at this point. Thank you so much for tuning in.
So Mike, we do have a couple of questions in the chat. The first one coming from a Jamie Jackson with regards to blueprints. If the prime makes its own blueprints and/or redacts information on the blueprint, will this qualify as not passing CUI to your subs?
So that'll be the prime's call on that, and the primes are feeling a lot of pressure from the DoD. That's where they're going to apply pressure. They're going to apply pressure to the primes because the primes are ultimately accountable. So that's going to be a prime decision. If you're a prime vendor and you do have subs, you just need to think about, do we need to extend CUI to our other vendors, or can we just give a vendor one of our credentials and have them log into our account for the times that they need to have access to our CUI? That way we can maintain tighter control of it. That's going to be a case-by-case thing. But if you're flowing CUI down, you're going to absolutely need to maintain control of it. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you, Mike. Another question we have is, what are some security controls for mobile phones that make access to CUI? What are your thoughts on allowing mobile phones to have access to CUI?
Yeah, I wouldn't do it if I could avoid it. But if the business came to me and said it was necessary, then yeah, there are MDM solutions around that. I would ideally want those to be managed devices, meaning I would ideally want them to be issued by the company and have the company mobile device management solution on there. And then I would put very tight rules around what they're allowed to do with the CUI on their mobile devices. But again, I would challenge that a little bit from a business requirement standpoint and really make sure that it's a true requirement. And if it is, absolutely solvable. It's not a big deal. Hopefully that answered that one, Dustin.
All right, and then another question we have is, we have government contracts, but they do not involve CUI, and I don't expect future contracts will have CUI. Will we be subject to CMMC in the future, e.g. after 25, fiscal year 2025?
Yeah, I would look at level 1, which again is the requirement to have federally contract information, FCI. You're going to find that in the level 1 CMMC. So if you get into the appendices that I mentioned, Appendix A and Appendix B, it'll walk you through the level 1 requirements. And if you're not going to have CUI in your environment, that's okay. Level 1 is probably where you want to sit from a CMMC perspective.
And finally, it looks like we have a hand up, Matthew Heck.
Yeah. Hey, can you hear me, guys?
Yeah, Matt, go ahead, bud.
So I am the IT manager for a metal manufacturing facility, and the question I have, I can take care of all the requirements, on my computer network, and the additional 20 or whatever it is for level 3 CMMC. But the problem that I have is with my equipment on the shop floor, my machining centers, my press brakes, anything that takes a program for an ITAR part, and it's then lives on that embedded computer there, and the operator might delete it after they use it, but it leaves my controlled environment and then goes on these machines which have ancient software, ancient operating systems. Some of them are newer, but it's like outside of my realm of management. How do I apply those same, all the requirement points in CMMC to those, which when, I can't do a lot of that stuff on that equipment? Any ideas?
Yeah, so yeah, and that's a common concern. Again, looking at it from a CUI perspective on where that CUI is going. If it's into your manufacturing systems, anything you can do from a mitigation standpoint or a compensating control standpoint, you can go ahead and document that as your implementation. So what are the things that you're doing to mitigate the risk, on those systems, whether they're, standalone, whether they're air gapped, right? Those kinds of things. That's an area that gets very specific very quickly based on vendor, based on equipment type. So I'd be happy to follow up with you on that one, Matt, specifically, and see what that exact situation looks like.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. I can give you contact information, or if one of you guys on your team wants to send me yours, I'd like to follow up with that. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, sure, Matt, no problem. Okay, Dustin, we got anything else?
No, Mike, that's all the questions in the chat, but if anyone did want to raise their hand, we could address that at this time.
Okay, I didn't see any hands go up, so I'll wrap it up, folks. Thanks again for joining us today. Our intent was, again, just to share information with you to help you make right decisions with regards to this. It is important. It's a national security issue, again, near and dear to my heart, so that's why I'm in this business and why I'm doing what I do. If we can help you in any way, please reach out, even if it's just a question or something that you might need some assistance with. You have our contact information. We'd be happy to help you. Thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We wish you well on your CMMC journey. Thanks again.